Where he has proceeded, presumably he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become...
You know, I've thought many times that it must have been far worse to receive this news at home and have nothing to do but just listen to these terrible details unfolding one by one.
As this tragic day goes on.
Finally, Charles Collingwood took over to give me a bit of a break. Well, I went into my office. I picked up the phone, trying to call Betsy. When I grabbed it, I realized somebody's on the line, and then this voice came, this very Park Avenue voice. Hello, hello, hello. I'd like to speak to somebody in charge of CBS News. And I said, well, you're speaking to CBS News. And she said, well, I'd like to complain about your having on the air at this time that Walter Cronkite crying his crocodile tears when we all know he hated John Kennedy. Well, I never hated John Kennedy in the first place, but to hear this kind of a complaint, I said, Madam, what is your name? And she gave me one of those hyphenated names. I don't know, Mildred Smith or something, the kind, or Smith Johnson. And I said, Mrs. Smith Johnson, you're talking to Walter Cronkite, and you, madam, are a damned idiot. And hung up the phone.
This is a CBS News inquiry.
There were so many questions asked about the Warren Commission report on the assassination.
This is what a rifleman would see from a sixth-floor window.
We spent a lot of money in those days, over $1 million, to do a special investigation.
Oswald, the commission tells us, fired 3 shots.
But is there more to this story than the Warren report ever discovered?
And we established, to our satisfaction, that a single gunman could have fired off 3 shots in time. That the shadows on the little grassy knoll were not people, but something else, that there were only 3 shots. We set out to try to prove that Warren Commission was wrong. All we did was prove this right.
Did Lee Harvey Oswald shoot President Kennedy?
I think all the evidence points to Lee Harvey Oswald as the single assassin, maybe with one accomplice, although I rather doubt that.
The man was brought immediately to police headquarters.
I don't know, but this grandiose conspiracy, this Oliver Stone junk, absolute junk that guy perpetrated on an unsuspecting generation, planted thoughts about Lyndon Johnson himself plotting the assassination, making a hero out of Garrison, the attorney in New Orleans, who came close to being a certified nut.
There's no question about it.
Furthermore, if there had been the kind of conspiracy that movie made out, or any of these major conspiracy theorists propound, I don't believe for 1 minute it could have been kept a secret for all these years. When you've got a number of conspirators, somebody usually breaks. Something breaks in that story.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Shortly before the Kennedy assassination, we'd expanded the evening news from 15 minutes to a half an hour.
The first broadcast of network television's first daily half-hour news program.
When we went to a half hour, I had the naive idea somehow or other that we were going to have plenty of time on the broadcast to do a little feature story at the end of the broadcast. And if we're going to do a little feature story, then why couldn't I have a signature line?
And that's the way it is, Monday, September the 2nd, 1963.
Well, I thought of, and that's the way it is. Well, I did it, and Dick Salant, God bless him, our news president at the time, just hated it, thought it was an awful idea, tried to talk me out of it, but I kind of got my Dutch up, I guess, and I stuck with it.
And that's the way it is.
And that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
That's the way it is. Thursday, November 30th, 1978.
Dick Salant's feeling was that maybe it was a little bit arrogant, suggesting that everything we said was correct, and that was really the way everything was, no possibility of error. In thinking about it, mulling it over, I think he is probably right.
Next,
The sports car craze has been sweeping the country.
behind the wheel,
The minute you know that I'd rev up that engine at the track.
and later, Cronkite Remembers America at War.
The American people were confused, even as I was.
From Vietnam to Chicago.
think we've got a bunch of thugs here,
Take your
Dan.
hands off of me unless you plan to arrest me.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
Cronkite reporting.
Thrill anyone would out of racing cars.
Getting out in the open air, particularly in the summertime, the spring, the fall, boy, that's living.
As teenagers in Houston, we used to have illegal jalopy races at an abandoned old wooden track. I started with real sports cars in the 50s. A few days before the race, I began worrying about being in that race. It's just too dangerous, I began to think. And each day got worse and worse as we got toward race day. I keep thinking maybe I can back out, maybe I'll fall down, break my arm, that sort of thing. But the minute, you know, that I'd get behind the wheel and rev up that engine at the track, all that fear just simply disappeared.
Into the corners, hard on the brakes, from over 100 down to 20 perhaps. Gear down from 4th to 3rd and on to 2nd. Then hard on the gas and back up to speed.
It became such a passion that I talked CBS into letting me cover some big races.
Here in the 19th running of the Grand Prix de Monte Carlo is about to begin.
A little bit of a boondoggle there.
3, 2, 1, and away they go. There goes Irving Moss of the rest.
It was all great fun for me, but with a wife and 3 children, I thought maybe I'd better take up something that the family could join in. And that's how I started sailing.
I remember sailing with my dad, handling the ropes and tying him up when he was taking a nap. The dog would come with us sailing.
At the end of the day, I'm always kind of relieved we made it again. I have whole lists of things I'm going to take into the lifeboat when it sinks. I always decided on a bottle of scotch and a bag of oranges and sun cream if I have time.
Sailing sort of turns me into Walter Mitty, you know, the James Thurber character was always imagining himself in some heroic adventure. Or at the helm of my sailboat, I'd always imagine that I'm setting sail with a load of tea for Southampton, maybe, or I'm going to chase down the pirates. Walter Mitty, that's me.
Cronkite Remembers will continue.
In the early stages of our involvement in Vietnam, not expressing this on the air, I tried to be as impartial as possible. Basically, I felt that our course was right.
This is the Jungle Trail, one of those you've been reading about back home.
I went to Vietnam for the first time in 1965.
Tio, where are you from, Tio?
California, sir.
I went on patrol with the ground troops.
Well, it's hard to realize the Viet Cong was right here this morning. They'll be coming out of this area, perhaps tonight, maybe tomorrow, if they dare challenge this airborne outfit.
And I flew with the B-57s on an operation.
And we're beginning to go down. 1, 2, 3, 4, we dropped our bombs, and now a tremendous G-load as we pull out of that dive. Oh, I know something of what those astronauts must go through. Wow.
I was slightly embarrassed, I am today, when I look at that tape, of my enthusiasm for the flight.
Well, Colonel, it's a great way to go to war. Yes, sir.
It was purely a childish enthusiasm for the thrill of the bombing run itself, and with no consideration of what was happening on the ground with those bombs. But then, suddenly became aware of the buildup in Cam Bay of a huge headquarters. It was quite apparent that we were building facilities to handle far greater forces than the administration admitted to us might even possibly be committed to that war. And my assumption at the time was if we're building it, they must already be in the pipeline. And if they're in the pipeline, then the administration's lying to us. And then came the Tet Offensive of 1968.
The American embassy is under siege.
The VC took over the village of Nam O last night.
It is inch by shattered inch in the 5-day battle for Hue.
Hell no, we won't go. Hell no.
And the American people were confused.
We're behind the boys in Vietnam.
They were confounded by what was going on, even as I was. So I thought, why not go out there and do a first-person story on what I found out, what I felt about that war. The Battle of Hue was far from decided when I got in there. I went in with the Marines.